Hello and welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chats. Not as good as 70 hours, but hey, it's something. Now, this episode, we're going to start off with a little bit of housekeeping because remember in my, like 2 episodes ago where I was like, man, the first day of 2022, I was sick. Well, and then I said, I think I literally said in the episode, we think it might be the big one, but I don't know. We haven't found out yet. Well, just got tested, and lo and behold, I got the Rona. What's really weird is that I literally think I got tested right around the time that it was ending, because, I cough a little bit now. I still got, stuffed nose and, stuffed ear, but it's other than that, I'm perfectly fine now. Now we can start off 2022 the right way. With that out of the way, let's get right into the news. First, here's something interesting. More Democrats have announced that they won't be seeking re-election, the most recent one being Ed Perlmutter. I think I missed out the fact that Bobby Rush has also stated that he's not going to be running for re-election. But we're seeing a lot of blue seats, a lot of Democrats are dropping out. And honestly, I'm down. Bobby Rush's seat is being very hotly contested. I don't know if Ed Perlmutter's is, because I think the way redistricting has played out for Colorado is that his seat's slightly more competitive. So I don't know if it's going to be that competitive in the primary, but it'll be competitive in the general. I'm down for all these races. I'm waiting to see how things go. Speaking of races, here's one race that I think is going to be very interesting. Well, it was already poised to be interesting, but now it's getting more interesting. North Carolina District 6 has gotten a new candidate, Clay Aiken. Now, here's the thing about Clay Aiken's candidacy. He's running on the fact that he's gay. He's doing identity idpol. He's doing idpol. Basically, here's what happened. He's basically saying, Madison Cawthorn and Mark Robinson, the lieutenant governor, and Madison Cawthorn, we all know whom he is. Basically, their comments about LGBTQ issues basically fueled him to be to run in this seat. Basically, his whole campaign commercials are I can't wait to see these two when they see that the South elects their first gay congressman. And it's and then he made this big deal about oh, we're gonna elect the first gay congressman in the South. And then he's also did another thing where he's he claims to be progressive, and then I disprove both in 2 seconds. So you're you are so progressive that you were a Klobuchar Biden voter. You endorsed Klobuchar and then you endorsed Biden. You didn't even endorse Pete. You didn't even endorse the potential first gay president, and you're just now you're running on we're gonna elect the first gay congressman in the South, and it's bro, you just he's literally just running on the fact that he was the American Idol guy. I remember when people used to just make fun of Clay Aiken all the time. It was probably because he was gay, to be honest. It was in the early 2000s. I just saw a ton of TV shows. They were just hey, Clay Aiken, haha, get it? It's that was the joke. The joke was Clay Aiken. No, I'm being serious. The jokes of the shows would literally be look, it's Clay Aiken. And then Clay Aiken would be hey guys, what's up? It's me, Clay Aiken. Get it? He's gay. I really hope to be in that seat now so I can snub both Aiken and Richard L. Watkins. Give me my money back! Anyways, next story. We're going to be talking about Jon Ossoff and Josh Hawley, who have introduced competing bills to end stock trading by members of Congress. For those who don't remember, there was this huge deal because they said, Pelosi, should we ban members of Congress from owning stock? And they're and Pelosi was no, thank you. And then Jon Ossoff basically said, no, thanks. Let me introduce it anyways. And then Josh Hawley, trying to pretend to be oh, I'm the real, populist guy. He introduced his own because I don't know why. He just wants to be the cool populist guy. He's trying to earn the little bit of a legitimately what he's trying to do is trying to get on Kyle Kalinski's show. And when I say that, I don't of course mean he doesn't actually want to get on Kyle Kalinski's show, but I mean he wants the lefties to look at him and be see, I guess he's not that bad after all. But then you look further into it and you realize this is nothing. Hawley's bill is objectively worse than Ossoff's, because Ossoff's bill not only includes dependent children of the members of Congress from bans them from having stocks as well, but also has a harsher punishment, where they would be banned the thing, and then they would be fined the entirety of their congressional salaries. Meanwhile, Hawley would just require the filers to forfeit any profits gained from the stock. Originally, Hawley pretended that he was going to co-sponsor Ossoff's bill, just like, we're just generally going to try and push for the issue. But he's making it pretty clear that he just wants his name to be associated with the issue. I didn't even know that he introduced his own bill until later, because now all the stories now have it so it's like Hawley and Ossoff. Even though Ossoff introduced the bill first and arguably made the issue a lot more apparent, Hawley is now being put there as well. They're basically just being like, see, these guys, these are the two young boys of Congress, and they're trying to do the right thing, and blah, blah, blah. It's just weird. But anyways, let's move on to the next story. We're going to talk about a union drive that happened. Okay, so I was on my, I was on one of my other Twitter accounts, just scrolling around Twitter, and when I noticed the hashtag New Deal for Animation, and then I looked further into it, and essentially, what recently happened was that an animation studio by the name of Titmous, who you may remember, I know, haha, get it, the name's funny, but funny name aside, Titmous is actually a very prominent animation studio. They've animated quite a few shows. They've animated Breadwinners, Baby Shark's Big Show, The Venture Bros, Metalocalypse, Black Dynamite, Mau Mau, Heroes of Pure Heart, The Animaniacs reboot, Randy Cunningham, 9th Grade Ninja, Turbo Fast, Motor City. They animated some things for Community. They've done a lot of animation. Recently, the New York branch of Titmous has unionized, and this is actually really big because not only 90% of the workers signed union cards, and Titmous agreed to voluntarily recognize this. This is the union, the Animation Guild. The Animation Guild is a animation union that mostly focused in LA for 70 years, but they have now branched out into New York, and they're now going to be that's a big deal. A historically West Coast union is now organizing in the East Coast, and this is part of a larger trend, not just for workers itself, but for the animation industry in specific, because as we all know, animators have becoming a lot more noticeable. You see, animators and animation studios, typically they were usually just brushed aside. You didn't know who they were. You didn't know who animated SpongeBob. Well, okay, that was an incredibly bad example because that's Nickelodeon Studios. But there were a lot of shows you had no clue who the animators were. You had no clue who the writers were. You had no clue. The only person that you knew for a cartoon, who worked on the cartoon, the only person you'd know is the creator. And even then, that would be because their name would be plastered right after the title card. But now animators and groups like animation studios have been making themselves a lot more well known. And there's also been a rise of independent animations. One thing I've been very excited to see that I haven't been able to see yet is Smiling Friends. That's a show that was literally made by a couple of YouTube animators that worked independently from Cartoon Network Studios. And yet, despite that, they were given a run of a show, and it was actually given a lot of praise. BoJack Horseman, their studio got a lot of praise for their unionizing. Of course, the show ended up getting canceled because of it. But of course, they did end up showing that it could be done. Creators are being a lot more open with things that are going on. A lot of the office politics, originally, the office politics would just be it. If a show was going to have a gay creator, a gay character in it, the creator would be silenced, and they'd just be nope, not happening. But now, these animation studios will be very vocal about this fact, and things can change. I'm very ecstatic for this because, especially animation in particular, animation's always been a weird interest of mine that I never actually got to do, and it's good to see animators finally getting their time in the spotlight. Next story, we're going to be talking about this. The Republican National Convention has threatened to prohibit future nominees from participating in the commission-run debates. So, for those who don't remember, since 1996, the Commission on Presidential Debates has been the one in charge of presidential debates. The first presidential debates were originally held by, and sponsored by the studio that would host them, but then there became an independent commission, the League of Women Voters, who would sponsor the debates, and then, lo and behold, after the League of Women Voters allowed independent candidates to get on the debate stage as well, like John B. Anderson and Ross Perot, the Republican and Democratic parties basically joined forces to create a commission on presidential debates that basically just said, we are going to be the ones in charge of the debates, and we'll only have it so that Republicans and Democrats get on the debate stage. Doesn't matter that Gary Johnson polled at 10% at one point. He didn't get to that arbitrary 15%, so he doesn't get to be on the stage. And it's always shown preferential treatment to the Republicans and Democrats. However, since Donald Trump's hissy fit in the last election, Republicans are not pretending that the commissions of the presidential debates has been historically anti-Republican. So now they're making up this BS story so that they can just change how the debates are being structured. I saw third-party Twitter go like, see, they're finally catching on. It's like, guys, they don't care. This is just a pissy fit because in the debates, they said, Trump, you can't just randomly go like, during the debate. Like, that's literally the only reason that the Republicans are pretending to care about this issue. Literally, they're mad that Donald Trump was fact-checked during the debate, and they're like, Trump, you're stupid. What? That's all this is, and realistically, they're not actually going to boycott the debates. If the commission literally just says, no, we will not listen to your demands, they'll just go, okay. Like, what's Trump gonna do? What's Trump gonna do? Not debate? What are the people actually gonna do? What are the GOP nominees actually gonna do? Are they gonna say, no, we will not be doing this debate? We're gonna actually sit here and say that we will not do the general election presidential debate because we were mad that you said Trump can't go, no, wrong. We are mad that you can't have Trump do that, so we will not be participating in the debates. No, they're not going to do that. That's stupid. They would actually, okay, well, maybe the Republicans might actually do it. I don't know. I don't care. I don't think that the commission has been fair to third parties. I don't care. But the thing is, you give it to the league, it's not going to magically change back. You're not going to magically have freaking, what's the third party guy that's actually planning on running? Vermin. You're not going to have Vermin Supreme on the debate stage if you put the League of Women Voters back in charge. It's all just a shit show. It doesn't matter. Speaking of shit shows, Ukraine. I have not been talking about the Ukraine story, but Russia's going to literally invade Ukraine. That's a thing that's actually going to happen. All the signs point to they're literally going to invade Ukraine. Like, Russia is preparing operation to justify the Ukrainian invasion. Reportedly, they've sent people to go down to Ukraine and cause trouble so that Russia can storm in. Russia has there have apparently been hackers that have hacked the websites of the government of Ukraine and have been sent messages to the foreign agency, literally saying we are coming, be prepared. Legitimately, Russia is going to invade Ukraine. That is something that is actually going to happen. So Zach Hadel, YouTube animator and creator of the Adult Swim show Smiling Friends, who's somehow really knowledgeable on politics for some reason. Do you have any thoughts on this? Yeah, that's what's going to happen. Anyways, now let's move on to the main topic of this video. This episode is going to be released on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Now, Martin Luther King Jr. is, I say this for everybody, but it is especially true of Martin Luther King Jr., an interesting political figure. This guy who was notoriously hated for his time period, who is still, for some reason, both really hated and really loved. The people who really loved him back then love him now. The people who really hated him back then are pretending they love him now. There's some people who hated him then that still hate him now, but people that were vastly different. And I feel it's best to maybe we just have a discussion about Martin Luther King Jr., who he is, and why a lot of people really want to misinterpret everything that he said to push their own political agenda. Now, Martin Luther King Jr., we all know what he's best known for. He's best known for his fight for the civil rights of African Americans, particularly through nonviolent protesting and speeches. His most famous speech, of course, being his I Have a Dream speech. But of course, nowadays, when you talk about him online, of course, now you're going to get a bunch of people that say, well, that's not all he talked about. Well, not all the time. You're going to get some people who do legitimately think that is all he talked about. First, we're going to talk about the people who want to misrepresent him in a sense that they think that civil rights is literally all he talked about. Mostly people who are like liberals and even conservatives. Liberals, of course, have adopted MLK to basically be like one of their figureheads, so to speak. Despite the fact that MLK and a lot of people like him, as in like civil rights activists who were of his political viewpoint, did not necessarily hold liberals to the highest regards. Like, I mean, everybody brings up the white moderate quote, which is basically a quote about liberals. Everybody of that time basically made the jokes about liberals. They're 10 spaces to the left on a good day, and they're 10 spaces right on anything that affects them personally. That's a quote from a song called Love Me, I'm a Liberal, but MLK held very similar sentiments. Like, he mocked the idea of, like, the white moderate, as I said before, but he talked about the similar subjects, like, oh, the liberals in the North will be like, oh, we're so saluting of the white, of, like, the Southern Negro, but then when time comes for them to address issues in their own neighborhoods, all of a sudden, it disappears. Like, they'll, of course, bring attention to the ideas like, look at the South. The South is literally lynching black people. That's so screwed up, man. I'm with you 100%, Martin Luther King Jr. And then he says, okay, then how about we talk about busing in your area? All of a sudden, they're like, that's a little bit of crazy talk. But as the phrase that I keep trying to coin says, tomorrow's moderate is today's radical, or some variation of that. I'm pretty sure I stole that from something. While MLK was radical for his time for thinking that black people deserve equal rights, now that's kind of the norm. Sure, you get the occasional oddball that's like, no they don't, but most of the time they're laughed away. Even the people that were the hardest against MLK, well, not the hardest, obviously, there were people who were harder on him than what the next group of people are, but people who were relatively hard on MLK, now all of a sudden, they're pretending like, oh, MLK was on our side the whole time. That is, of course, conservatives. Conservatives really want to play up the idea that MLK was a conservative of any kind, that in actuality, his viewpoints would be more in line with the Republican Party than they would be with the Democratic Party. And I guess it's time to just come out and say it. He was a socialist. Martin Luther King Jr. was a Democratic Socialist. And emphasis on the Democratic part, because even though I don't think he was officially registered with either party, maybe he was, I would assume maybe ballot laws in his states were stricter, so maybe he actually was a registered member of these parties. But he actually was an active voter for quite a few candidates. He voted for Adlai Stevenson. He voted for John F. Kennedy. He said that he would have publicly endorsed John F. Kennedy for a second term. His favorite senator was Paul Douglas for being the best of all the senators because of his civil rights record. He made a public anti-endorsement of Barry Goldwater. MLK was just generally, obviously, a socialist. In fact, many people point out this fact as well, that many people forget, well, quote-unquote forget, that the last thing that he worked on before his death was not even related to civil rights. He was actually pushing for Vietnam War activism and the Poor People's Campaign, which was set to basically be the civil rights movement, but for poor people. It was generally the same idea, like, except for poor people broadly. He understood that the problems with African Americans didn't just end with the racism. The racism had to be bred from something, and the racism had to be helped by something. So he was like, capitalism is the problem. So he was going to focus on that issue. In fact, many people actually tried to argue that MLK should use that as a stepping stool to run for president as an explicitly socialist candidate. But MLK did understand at the end of the day that it was better for him to remain like an impartial activist, because if he like even with his like endorsements of the Democrats, like he always made it abundantly clear, like, I'm not a Democrat, or at least I'm not like a Democrat. I'm not a guy who goes to the Democratic rallies and be like, yeah, Democrats. He understood that Democrats were not the saving grace. They were just a means to an end. Some Democrats could be a saving grace, obviously, like he liked Paul Douglas, he liked JFK, but the same party that housed those two was housing the guy who was in charge of his state that literally led to 4 black girls getting killed by the KKK. So he couldn't really be like a super pro-Democrat politician. However, there is another problem with the MLK thing. You see, there are a lot of people who are like socialists. Like I see this. Like, I mean, I remember all the stuff I said. I've heard a million times before. I think we're starting to see a problem. Is because a lot of people seem to be grasping at the idea that, like, oh, just because he didn't talk about, like, just because the civil rights thing wasn't all he talked about, that must mean that he actually talked about this issue more. Like, it seems that there's some sort of, like, class reductionist idea being attached to MLK. Like, they're trying to do a class reductionism on MLK. There are communists and socialists that are trying to, like, claim, like, oh, you see, this is just liberal Oedipal that was, like, used to try and, like, whitewash MLK, and instead now we have to talk about, like how he was actually focused on, like, the class issues, and it's like, guys, he led the civil rights movement. I'm pretty sure race was an important issue for him. He just felt that the issues of race and class were intertwined and used one issue to talk about the other and vice versa. Granted, this is an incredibly small movement, but it does seem that it's growing. Like, there's this weird sort of like side movement of like people trying to make the MLK stuff somewhat like, oh, he was actually truly a class guy, 100%. But it's like, no. He was a class and race guy. Like, that's what the New Left was. The New Left was literally like class and race. And anti-imperialism. You could be in favor of more than one thing. He realized that capitalism and racism was basically bred together to create some sort of symbiotic thing that made it hard for black people to get ahead in life. And it was only due to socialism that they could try and get back up into the light, which was a view that was held by another civil rights leader, Malcolm X. Granted, of course, we understand they had slightly different views. You see, Malcolm X was more of a revolutionary socialist, I guess you could say. Meanwhile, MLK was, of course, a democratic socialist. And that actually led to a lot of other divides, which are still seeing a little bit to this day. Because now we're getting people on the left. Like, I mean, I talked about the people that were trying to, like, steal him. And now we're talking about the people who try to still hate him. Like, I mean, of course, like, I mean, I could just talk about the white nationalists, but we all know they hate MLK because he was a black socialist. Like, we all know that. But what other people, like, there's another group of people that hate him because of other things. Like, and it's mostly, these are people on the left that don't like him. Like, and you might say, wait, they're only on the left that don't like Martin Luther King Jr.? They don't like him? Why? Well, quite a few reasons. One, they don't like him because they see him as like a liberal sellout. We have some socialists that think that MLK was truly like some sort of like vanguard, but then we have other people who think that he was a liberal sellout. Like, he sold out Oedipal to like get close to people. And this is at the time and now. We also have people who don't like him because they don't like his views on like integration. He was of the belief that white people and black people could coexist and live under an equal society. Of course, we have white nationalists who think otherwise, but there are also black nationalists who think otherwise. Then we also have this one, beep beep, anti-Semitism alert. We have people who hate Martin Luther King Jr. because he was a Zionist. And by that I mean he said like, oh yeah, the Holocaust was really bad and I think that we need to help our Jewish brethren. Oh no, so bad. Like I said, it's just a dog whistle for anti-Semitism. I guess since we're on this topic, we should talk about a little bit about how we're taught MLK. We're of course taught the very like liberal perspective on MLK. Most people don't end up finding out that he's a socialist until after they get out of school. Or at the very least, they don't find out until at least high school. At least that's when I think I learned that he was a socialist. But even then, it was like independent research. Here's one weird tidbit that I remember learning about MLK that I don't necessarily know if I'm remembering it right. Because it seems so weird to bring up. Okay, so I remember in elementary school, we did this thing where it's like, we learned about all these like famous like figures, like Martin Luther King Jr., or was it in, the thing I'm talking about that I'm saying right now, this happened in elementary school, but I don't know if I learned this in elementary school or like middle school. But essentially, we had this big thing, this big event where it was like, oh, we learned about Mahatma Gandhi, we learned about Mother Teresa, MLK. But there was this one time either during that or during a normal class where we were learning about MLK, and then like the speaker said, but MLK was a hypocrite. He smoked when he preached non-smoking. And they even added the addendum of like, oh yeah, well he was actually smoking when he was killed. And it's like, oh, okay. I did a quick Google search, and I don't know if this is a common thing that's taught, like MLK hypocrite smoking, but like apparently he did hide the fact that he smoked. It was just a thing that he didn't want photographed. And yeah, he did hide the fact that he smoked, but like, so? Who cares? Everybody in the 60s smoked. But of course, like, that's just weird. That's how I was taught in North Carolina. Just like, oh yeah, by the way, MLK was a hypocrite. He smoked. It's like, okay. Almost as if they were like, we can't let this kid know that a Negro did something good. We have to say he did something bad. Like, what? This is so confusing. Speaking of MLK dying, I guess this is the next topic of interest in regards to Martin Luther King Jr. I know a lot of you are probably sitting here waiting for me to talk about this part of MLK's life, the end, mostly because there's this one very prevalent conspiracy theory that everybody seems to agree with. That MLK was not killed by who we think he was killed by. You see, many people point to the fact that James Earl Ray, the alleged assassin, did a guilty plea, which meant that he wasn't going to be formally put on trial, and they were just like, okay, he's going to jail now, goodbye. But then he said that he was coerced. Many people claim that the FBI or the CIA had killed him. In fact, I had a teacher who explicitly stated that Martin Luther King Jr. was shot in a specific way so that he would be paralyzed, and that they would take him to the hospital so that he would be smothered in his, like, while he was being checked up on. Now, the official story goes that James Earl Ray was a extremely, like, rabid racist who was a supporter of the George Wallace candidacy, and then he joined up with, like racist rhetoric against MLK, and then ended up taking matters into his own hands, and tried to kill him, in a sense, to try and hope that maybe when George Wallace got elected, he'd get a pardon or something. Now, of course, due to COINTELPRO and Project Minaret, you know, MLK was looked after quite a lot. The NSA wiretapped his home. The FBI literally sent him a suicide letter. And MLK's family had very much openly stated that they did not believe that he was killed by him, and that he was instead killed by the FBI or the CIA or something like that. Look, I understand all this, but here's the thing. That's not been proven. I'm sorry, guys, but like, James Earl Ray doing the crime has been proven. MLK being killed by the FBI has not been proven. And all the information just adds up. James Earl Ray, some racist dude, killed a prominent civil rights activist. He left his fingerprints on the gun. He's openly stated that he did that. Like, and then he confesses very openly on, like, the second he gets caught, like, yeah, I did it. Because he was convinced that, like, he would be pardoned and he would be some sort of, like, American icon. But then he finds out George Wallace will not be elected president. So he's like, uh-oh, I'm screwed. He enters a plea deal without thinking clearly. And then he finds out later that he didn't need to take that plea deal at all. Because the only reason he took the plea deal was because he thought that he would be killed. Like, he thought that he would get the electric chair. But the death penalty was actually unconstitutional at the time period. So he took a plea deal to get 99 years in jail so that he wouldn't be killed. But then he figured out, oh wait, no, I actually could have gotten I could have gotten a fair trial, and I would have probably gotten a lesser sentence because of that fair trial. So then he joins up with the idea of like, oh yeah, I didn't do it. He stokes the conspiracies. He even gets MLK's family to try and get him to have a trial, just so he can like be not even acquitted, like just so he could get a lesser sentence. Be that as it may, like let's say tomorrow, like information comes out and undoubtedly it's proven that the FBI killed Martin Luther King Jr. Like there's no ifs, ands, or buts. There's like an FBI document that is leaked or is revealed publicly, and it's like an FBI letter with the FBI with J. Edgar Hoover's signature signing off on James Earl Ray being an FBI informant who was tasked with killing MLK, or there's like some other like broader conspiracy of it. Like, and there's undeniable evidence that that's proven. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, this is the same organization that basically just did what a 12-year-old does to a YouTuber. They don't like, lol, kill yourself. Like, it wouldn't be surprising if they actually did kill him. I'm just saying that the evidence as it stands does not point to that conclusion. I know it's easy to just think that the FBI killed all these prominent people so that you can have a clean conscience or something, but he could just easily have been killed by some rando. Anyways, that's essentially all I can really say on the topic of Martin Luther King Jr. He's a figure that has been talked about quite a lot in U.S. history, and rightfully so, because he's done quite a lot, and has become a generally well-liked figure, regardless of your political viewpoints. Happy MLK Day! Sorry that your life had to be cut short. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click that bell to be notified when a future video comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, check out my articles in the Independent Political Report, or consider supporting me on Patreon.